Great.
Welcome to Form and Function from Afar. We really appreciate you being here for this virtual conference. I'm Linda Marshall, one of the founding instructors at Book, Paper, Thread, and I'll be the moderator for this session, Beyond Pigment and Paste, Creating New Dimensions on Paper with Suzanne Moore. We're glad to have you be part of 3 days of presentations and demonstrations by some of the most interesting and inspiring artists and craftspeople in our community. Before we get going, I'd like to cover a few things about how this Zoom seminar will be run. This is slightly different than a Zoom meeting, which you may be more familiar with. Since we have a large audience, attendees will not be connected by video, but you can certainly ask questions and make comments. There are 2 avenues for that, the chat and the Q&A sessions, which you should see along the bottom of your screen. We have someone monitoring both. We'll use the chat for sharing links to things that the presenter mentions during the talk, and the Q&A was where you can type in questions. We will either type a response there or the presenter may answer the questions live. So to recap, questions only in the Q&A and comments or other types of sharing in chat. There are a lot of you here, so please be patient if your question is not addressed right away. And this is a great time to check out the chat by telling us where you're from and saying hi. Along the way, if you think of a question after the fact, there's space to post follow-up questions and continue the conversation on the conference website. Lastly, if you experience issues connecting or other technical trouble, don't despair. This session is being recorded and will be available to view first on the conference website and later on the Book, Paper, Thread YouTube channel. So if you miss anything, you can circle back and rewatch any of these webinars. I'll introduce Suzanne in a minute and hand it over to her, but I first want to acknowledge our sponsors who made it possible for us to offer this virtual conference to you all for free. We have 10 fabulous sponsors listed on our conference site. Please check out what they're sharing in the virtual vendor fair and see what they have to offer by following the links to their websites. Don't forget that some of the sponsors are offering discounts for conference attendees, so be sure and see their listings in the virtual vendor fair. So now to introduce Suzanne. Suzanne Moore is a printmaker, painter, and lettering artist whose eclectic interests fuse in the diversity of her artist books. Born to a family of gifted inventor engineers and raised in a post-Sputnik Middle America, her aptitudes in math and science channeled her into those areas at an early age. She made her way into the world of art at 20-something and earned a BFA in printmaking and drawing in Wisconsin. She mixes an array of media and design approaches in her work, layering pages with color and forms to create rhythmic unfolding narratives with painted, lettered, and printed images, lettering, and typography. Suzanne's work is exhibited widely, and her books have been acquired for private and public collections in the US and Europe. Suzanne has made manuscript and edition books since 1984. She was part of the Wales-based team creating illuminations for the St. John's Bible. She teaches in the US and abroad on contemporary manuscript design, painting and lettering, and developing conceptual ideas in book form, and is currently conjuring a series of online classes from her new home studio in Tucson. I'll now turn it over to the curious, adventurous, and talented artist, Suzanne Moore. Enjoy her ideas, presentation, and demo.
Greetings, everyone, for the last presentation of the middle day of this amazing conference. And all of you far and wide, I saw a few of the locations that you all are in, from Berkeley to Japan. Welcome. And I wanted to give a special thanks and many kudos to Karen and Andrew and Linda for imagining this amazing conference to spread passion in making books and all things about paper arts. So their vision to create this rich and accessible and far-reaching gathering was really extraordinary. I was born in Iowa, and so the field of dreams, film, and concept is dear to my heart, and they certainly did build it, and they will come. So thank you all, and thank you for coming. So Linda gave you a little sketch of my background, and you'll see a lot of the imagery that I show you in the keynote and in my books has to do with lettering. I consider books a real opportunity to make architecture that's portable, or portable places for viewers to go to be inspired, sheltered, educated, and maybe surprised. Surprised would be really nice, especially over the long term. So a lot of my work has involved color and different ways of applying paint to paper, often based in very traditional ways of working, and then exploring the possibilities beyond what they were originally meant and designed to do. And this Beyond Pigment and Paint is based on paste paper techniques with acrylic paint using paste or methyl cellulose as an extender for the paint and a way for it to go onto pages that make it immobile. So I have chosen just two of the many things that I've experimented with over the last 30 some years. And last night I was calculating how many pages I've painted that have ended up in books. And I think it's over 2,000 sheets. So don't despair when you start and you don't get everything happening just the way you want it at the beginning, because it takes experimentation, and you should see what got left on the cutting room floor. So as I said, I'm part of an engineer inventor family, and so I tend to take materials and ideas and try to see how far I can push them. And the,
Suzanne, Suzanne, sorry for breaking in, but we're getting quite an echo. Even though we turned off the sound on your phone, I think you have to mute it completely.
oh, how do I do that?
Do you know how you turn it all the way down on the side till it goes on mute?
Yes, I did that.
I don't think it went all the way down.
Is that better?
Talk a little more.
So just doing a testing for the microphone.
There's still an echo.
Oh, okay. So any other ideas?
Andrew, do you mind chiming in? I can't read the chat, and I know there's some suggestions coming up.
Yeah, some people are suggesting that she log out and log back in with the phone with no sound. I'm not quite sure how that works myself.
So I log out.
Okay, when you Zoom log in, it looks like folks are saying you can log in without sound. So
If I could see the surface of the phone, that would be really great.
oh, say no sound when you log back in is one of the suggestions.
Or try *6, somebody's saying.
Okay, it looks like your phone is connecting to audio at the moment. So
it says call using internet audio, but I do not want to do that. Is that
No.
right?
No.
correct.
So cancel.
Okay, why don't you talk now?
Okay.
Keep going.
And then the orientation is off again. So
Just
There you go. Perfect. Thanks everyone for your patience.
A Zoom presentation wouldn't be a Zoom presentation without a little glitch here and there, right?
Absolutely.
so is that really solved it?
It
I
did.
think it has. Thanks, Suzanne.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. The screen is a little far away from me, so I didn't see messages. I couldn't read messages as I was talking. Okay, so
And let me just ask you one more thing, since it's recorded. Do you want to start again, or do you want to just keep going?
no, I think we should keep going.
Okay, good.
That's mostly background information. So I first learned paste paper techniques from some of the amazing bookbinders and edition book workers in the East Hampton, Northampton area where we lived when we first left California, and immediately decided that I wanted to use those techniques to make things, make paper surfaces that didn't look like paper anymore, that looked, deeper and richer and more layered. So that these techniques have come from those, 2,000 sheets of of experimentation. And everything, I tried to put everything that I'm talking about, materials and techniques, step-by-step techniques, in the 4-page PDF. So what I'd like you to do is just enjoy the demonstration and not feel like you have to take notes, because you can always come back and watch the video. And on the Book Paper Thread website, or you have a YouTube channel specifically for Book Paper Thread? Is that right?
Yes, and we'll have it on the conference website for the next month or so, and then we'll follow up and get that on YouTube once we do a little editing.
Great, great. So Linda, if you'd like to start the keynote. Could you fix that, honey, by putting some more tape on it?
yeah. So are you off?
Next. Use this. Color irresistible, absolutely irresistible. And it makes life so interesting. Next. Next. In nature, it's pure magic. I don't know how that glow happens from the inside of flowers and leaves. Next. Glass's color comes from metals and metal oxides. Next. Leather is dyed, and so pigment is not involved in that process. And this is a detail of a piece that Don Glaister, my husband, did on a book about the letter Q. All different skins in different shades of red. Next. Fabrics can be painted or dyed. Next. And of course, Kandinsky used pigment, and the carrier was oil. So all pigments need some kind of a binder to attach them to the surfaces that we're going to use them on. Next. And pigments, because they're actually particles of, they're chemical particles or come from the natural world or plant material, they need some kind of a physical binder that attaches them. So it can be gum arabic and gouache, oil, acrylic, wax, grease, all kinds of things can attach pigment to paper. Next. The materials that I'm going to show you about are new pastels and other pastels and graphite. And we're going to use acrylic paint and matte medium combined with methyl cellulose, which acts as the methyl cellulose acts kind of like an extender and a binder. And because we use dampened paper, it gets that acrylic color to settle into the surface of the paper rather than sit on top. Next. So you can create pages that are so subtle with pastels or very intense. In the upper left, this is a piece that has pastels on a layer underneath that are moved around on the wet sheet. It's let completely dry and then gesso is put over it. Whereas the right-hand sheet is methyl cellulose, matte medium, and then just the strokes to make the letters of the woman's name, our friend's name, Suzanne, for her birthday. And the fine white lines are done with a squeeze bottle and acrylic ink. So that is not pastel, just the bigger strokes are pastel. Next. So the pastel can go on very subtly and smoothly, as you see in the vertical band on the left, smoothed into Arch's text wove, the screen side, which is the side that is right reading with the logo, or you can get very granular looks with something, the new pastels on a textured paper. And so and I'll show you how to do it so that it looks like it's just the pastel on naked paper, as you see on the right, or the pastel on a gessoed sheet or colored sheet on the left. Next. Again, much more soft look on the Arches text wove in the upper left. On the right is a textured paper, not a pastel paper, but one of the, oh gosh, I've forgotten. What's the really common paper that people use for paste paper? I'll think of it in a minute and come back. And just the difference in the way that paper dampens. No, thank you. It's not Ingress or Ang. It's Mohawk Superfine. And some of the Superfine, yes, thank you. the Mohawk Superfines there are many permutations of it. So you can get really interesting looks with that paper, and it's thinner. So for certain applications, it's very nice. Next. You can do a single panel, or because you can take these sheets and redampen them and repaint them, you can paginate a book by painting on and drawing on both sides. Next. And a full sheet, might be quite busy and not really what you're looking for, but imagine taking sections of it and cutting them, cutting even panels, and making an entire book out of one sheet of paper that you tip or sew or attach somehow onto a blank sheet, which I'll show you in a minute, and have a whole book out of 1 or 2 sheets of decorated paper with plenty of space for letterpress, handwriting, hand lettering. Next. Combination of color on the surface of the text wove, the kind of greeny yellow, and then most of the marks that you can see they're quite granular, and so they're made with charcoal or black and colored new pastels, and then you see a little bit in the arc to the right of graphite. Next. On colored sheets, it makes quite a different effect because, of course, the eye kind of mixes and plays with colors. And if you use colors on opposite ends of the color wheel, you get what the Impressionists use so well, that vibration in the retina, on the retina of your eye between complements or approximate complements. So all the magenta and all the white on this piece are done with pastel or white chalk on a green Ang paper. Next. This is the beginning of an alphabet piece I did. So again, with methyl cellulose and gesso on the surface of a paper, coating it and working always wet on wet to do these techniques. And then the dramatic dark is sumi, also done when the paper is wet. So if there are other techniques and materials that you're interested in combining with the pastels, it's just experiment and see what you can come up with. And then a little bit of sponging to move the black around so that you get these kind of vibration, the feeling of vibration. Next. This is a piece that was an experiment for a book about the letter Q. I'm really upset that QAnon has kidnapped one of my favorite letters and given it a bad name. Q is one of those letters in the alphabet that's so unusual, but it often has connotations of inquiry and questioning and curiosities. There's some really interesting words about searching with the letter Q beginning them. So this is paste paper on the left, paste paper and black swatches of new pastel on the bottom left of that Q, and then big areas of a whole width of a stick, making that pattern that goes up the right side. And then the 2 Qs that look very linear are letterpress printed from polymer plates by Jessica Sprung in Tacoma, Washington, my good friend and printer girl idol. And so I was experimenting about making an edition book about the letter Q that didn't really come about, but this was an experiment for that. Next. So really, really subtle and, white and pastel, dramatic depth by putting color down first, letting it completely dry, and then pulling black over it and exposing it. And the piece in the bottom is a layering of doing the pastel technique on gessoed paper around that silk screened word point. So we put down primary colors and then let it dry completely, and then put down another coating of methyl cellulose and polymer to get the pastel to stick. And after putting that complementary color over the areas around that word, I brushed a little bit of gesso, kind of thin gesso over it to soften it up. Next. So as subtle or as complex as you would like to do it. This is also from the Zero Cipher of Infinity, which was ambitious edition book with a tremendous amount of handwork in it. And the left-hand page shows you multiple applications, all of those circular forms denoting nothing come from putting things under the paper and then having the chalk pastel catch on the texture that is under the paper. But that's for another time. We're going to start today with just the demonstration of the pastel. And then lots of other handwork on top of that. So, you can do it with just the painted page as a finished piece, or it can be part of a much more complex piece. Next. And, longevity. So this is a cutout piece. This book is about 14 inches high, and these are cutouts of various doorways and thresholds. So to get it to be long-lasting as the book is used, next, and not have the graphite wear off, because these pages are pretty stiff. So you want to make sure that, with wear, they don't transfer onto each other. And that's the magic of using this technique. So this is gessoed pages that were first coated with methyl cellulose. And then this is just graphite around these openings, cut openings. Next. And next. And next. And this shows you what a progression of pages could be. This is on Arches Text Wove and Canson Me Tint. Next. So you can just press this as the image appears. You can just go through it pretty quickly, Linda. And some of the translucent Japanese papers that Nancy Jacoby talked about this morning. Okay, so I wanted to show you just a few pages from one more book, which we have in our possession briefly. It's called George and the Egyptian, and it's a book that my husband and I collaborated on almost 30 years ago, and was part of the collection in La Jolla for a long time at the Copley Library. And then Nancy Block purchased it, and she very generously is donating it to the Library of Congress. So, but I wanted to show you the combination. So this is Dawn's leather binding with onlays and inlays. And it's about the architecture of the Mark Twain House in Hartford, Connecticut. And This is a page that the band that's kind of horizontal in the upper right is, and the other orange is this technique that I'm going to show you with new pastel. And the rest of the paper is other techniques. This has just the big band across the lower right, done in dark magenta to get that really intense granular color. And this is passages from an unpublished Mark Twain manuscript. So this has just some areas on this side of the page that are the kind of granular new pastel, and I've combined it with paste paper, hand lettering, and then gouache painting on the right. So don't forget that combining these techniques with things that you're already interested in and a master at, mistress of, is an opportunity for you to make something that is completely distinct to your own experience and aesthetics. Okay. So we'll go to the desktop, Linda. Okay. And the first technique I'm going to show you is one that is done on the Arches text wove, which is what we're going to use today. And it is a stressing of these very strong Arches text wove fibers. And you can see this is paste paper here, but on the inside you have these drawn strokes. And that comes from just making marks in the paper. And then this is happens the same way. So the color goes on after you've made marks in the paper, and I'll show you how to do that. I experimented with methyl cellulose and this very intense sumi ink that Washi Arts has. This one happens to be labeled B. Linda gave me 4 little vials, and this is one I experimented with. Each of the 4 that she has are very similar to ground sumi. They're really, really rich. And because the pigment is ground so finely, you get this haze of black rather than a real coating on your paper. And by doing mark making in it, you can get a lot of different effects. And the color is so fine that it seeps underneath and through the paper. So, you know, by experimentation, you could figure out something to do to get the image on both sides. This is done with a comb for cleaning brushes, paint brushes. And these marks are all drawn into naked, uncolored paper. And then I'll show you how the color catches in the areas of the paper that are stressed a little bit. So this sheet was crumpled, and I made a little note that it was crumpled after I dampened it, but I'm going to show you how to first crumple and fold before we dampen, and how to make a damp stack. So you can take this paper, and it's not that beautiful, gentle fabric-like sheet that that Linda showed you and Nancy talked about with Japanese paper, but this paper is incredibly strong, and so it allows me, even dry and also wet, to make something that has real potential for spreading the paint. Another way that you can stress the paper is by folding it. And I sometimes, to register my folio, I make the center fold and usually leave some area to trim on one side or especially along the top. So I make the folios a little taller, and that makes it so I can put my notes up there and have little bits of color samples, and I can remember what I did to get this paper to look like this. So you can fold with your fingers with bone folders in different directions on different sides of the paper. And each time you fold, you will make a place that makes a very crisp line, assuming you do it. And you can do it just in certain parts of the page, so it doesn't have to go edge to edge. And of course, you could take it and randomly bone fold crinkles into it. And the reason you might prefer the Arches text wove is that it is so strong that it withstands these things as well as the abrasion that you're going to introduce to it. So to make my damp stack, whether or not I'm using flat sheets like this one or these rumpled sheets, I'm going to spray water on my surface, put the paper down. And I used to sponge this on and I dipped the paper for a while, but the dipping made it way too wet and then I had to sponge it off. And the idea is to minimally disturb the surface except for these real stressor lines, so that you're not changing the surface any more than necessary by doing the sponging. And I've discovered already, living in Tucson, that the paper itself, it comes out of the drawer so much drier than it did in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm having to use a lot more moisture here. So depending on your climate and where your paper is stored and the time of the year, you'll find that you need wetter or drier paper. So you make this damp stack, and it's a technique that printmakers used. And there are all kinds of more sophisticated ways to do it. But I just use a squeeze bottle and purified water, not distilled water, because all of my vats of water have to be the same. You know, they have to have some purification. So I do it with a Brita filter. And you can see there's a little bit of rumpling that happens as the paper is expanding. You're going to do this the night before or early the day that you're working on it while you're preparing some other things. And as the paper rumples up, these are relaxing a little bit, but see, there's still rumples because the grain is this way and it's doing this. So what I'm going to do is pull this back and just very gently flatten it out before I put it in the damp stack. This one is not going to go completely flat, but I want to get out the rumpling that happens from swelling as you introduce the moisture. Okay, so even and just very gently, and you could put something over this and smooth it like a piece of mylar or something if you wanted to really smooth it out flat, but that's fine. And because we're going to keep it moist and have it ready to work. And this is the damp stack that I made to prepare for the class. And I have labeled the samples I'm going to do for wet fold and one that I dry wrinkled and then I dampened. So, and if you can label in a permanent marker like a Sharpie, it will resist the color and really still show as you're painting over it or gessoing over it. So my damp stack, I'd like to have things as little rumple as possible. Again, to keep it damp, put it in a plastic bag and re-spritz the edges, especially because the paper is going to dry from the edges in. And then smooth all the air out. I'm going to turn it over because these are the ones that I'm using for the demonstration. And what you want to do is fold in the edges, get rid of the rest of the dampness, and then just put a piece of cardboard on there. No weight, because you don't want to create rumples in the pages by restricting them as they're continuing to expand. So if you do this overnight, you'll get really nice, even moisture, because the Arches Text Wove has both surface sizing and internal sizing. So I'm going to set these aside and have the side of the bag slit open, so it's really easy to take one sheet out at a time. And what I like to do is just pull them a little bit out. So if I put and angle them a little bit, so that if I put dirty hands in here, I'm only picking up one sheet at a time. So this is what you do right before you're ready to work. So, and I'm doing this on my pre-dampened pages. And even as I'm working, I'm gonna, because I'm here in the desert, I'm gonna put a little extra water in there and then take the first sheet out and fold this over, put my cardboard on top of it just to keep the rest of it nice and damp. I like to remind people that if you can be as conservative as possible with pigments and with polymers, we can make sure that the earth doesn't suffer. I say no living thing has to be at risk because we're making art. So if you can be very conscientious about how you use your colors and how you dispose of things, that is something that we will all benefit from, and 7 generations beyond us will too. And to that end, I discovered that if I did paste paper in the traditional way and mixed up color on into my paste or methyl cellulose, into my paste or methyl cellulose, those are interchangeable. I would end up with all these pots of acrylic paint. And if I couldn't use them up quickly enough because they were mixed with wheat paste that I had cooked, I would end up throwing them away. And I decided that that was not good enough. So this technique, this approach came from trying to figure out a better way to use materials in the studio. So I put my sheet on a very wet surface that I spritzed. I'm putting moisture onto the surface and not too wet a sponge. And this is something that I labeled dry wrinkle. And we're going to take a mixture of 3 parts methyl cellulose, or MC, and 2 parts MM, or matte medium. And that will allow us to use the pastels and the graphite on a blank sheet of paper, either colored or white. And I used to use these cellulose sponges solely in my work. Can you see that one? It's, it's a regular heavier sponge that you get at the grocery store. But then I started using these tile grouting sponges that come really big and you can cut them into pieces. And this sponge puts a much more textured surface on your paper of paint, and this is a little less abrasive, and it puts less texture into your paper, which you'll see really clearly when I'm starting to use. So I'm putting it into the paste and into the methyl cellulose matte medium mixture, coating my paper. And again, this helps the color sink into the surface as it dries. So the wetness and the mixture of the methyl cellulose and paste gives you a really nice wet on wet surface to play with. And instead of rinsing out all of my sponges, I put my sponges on my work surface under a recycled piece of plastic. And I just noticed this has holes in it. It would be better if it didn't, of course. And that keeps them damp. So to be ready for this demo, I didn't want to just brush them all out. So using a white plastic that you can get at sign shops pretty easily, I use that as the palette. And this has just the subtlest bit of folds left. It might have sat a little too long or not been quite stressed enough. So that very subtle possibility is certainly an option. Then any kind of a tool that you can use to abrade the surface. Once the paint is on, it's much easier to see. So I'm really putting some pressure on and moving this. And it's a little piece of the molding from redoing the molding in our house. Putty knife. So rather than store-bought things, what do you have in your world that could make an interesting texture? And this is the so I'm trying not to really tear the paper, but trying to get a feel for what I need to do to really make a little bit of abrasion. And then I'm going to pick a deeper red and a purple to add to this. But first we'll do this. And now you can see, I hope, that there are some subtle designs starting to show. And by sponging them with the clean side of the sponge and taking paint off, they start to appear even more. So this is a place where I might use this sponge that I put in just the tiniest bit of sumi yesterday. Will mix with the wet on wet color. My timekeeper is reminding me of how much time we have left. And then the thing that's a little bit hard to do here is just, you know, if I'm doing two pieces at a time, I'm going to put a little more black on here to tone it down. So you can mix colors on the surface. You can do a single color and this is so intense. I just touched it to the rim yesterday and ended up with a lot. But and I could leave it, you know, streaked like that. But what I want to show you is how it catches in the surface. And now I have excessive ink. So I'm going to take a sponge that doesn't have ink in it and pull some off. And that's still not showing the way I want. So I'm going to put a little bit of the matte medium methyl cellulose and use it as an eraser. So I'm getting a pretty subtle effect here for all the scraping and stressing I did. And depending on what's happening on the other side, which of course I can't predict without more experimentation and note-taking, but you can see even in a couple of minutes that it's starting to change by just soaking in and settling into the surface. So let's take a look at, oh, and this one didn't do much with the back side of the sheet yet. So some of them, especially magentas, will really do a lot. And if you press really hard with a soft sponge, it makes a little more contrast because you've taken off a little bit of the color and you can see the stressing a little bit more. Of course, my demo didn't end up quite as dramatic as I would like it. So, and I'm going to take this paper, holding it across the area on the top that I'm going to trim off. And to dry, I use corrugated cardboard, just recycled corrugated cardboard, and landscape weed block. So this material that comes in big rolls, you and your friends can take one roll and have all you need for a lot of work. And I put that on top of, it's a little bit like, what's the conservation? Yeah, it's a little bit like Remay, but more accessible and a little less expensive. To clean up before I do the next sheet, I'm going to take a scrubby, and I used to clean up with paper towels, and then I looked at the amount of waste I was creating in my studio and decided that old washcloths and towels were going to be the perfect solution. So I clean up with that and make a really nice surface, completely clean and ready. And you can soak these in Murphy's oil soap and have them for years. I've had these doing additioning for a long, long time, but it really cleans up the surface, gets it nice and ready for the next sheet, and you're not using a lot of paper. Okay. This one is labeled wet fold. And so it's one that I'm going to fold for you wet and see if we can get some linear things and a little more drama for the camera. And again, it can be a super simple design. I'm going to re-wet my surface. And this time, I'm going to put the methyl cellulose. So this is a sheet about 10 inches by 14 inches of text wove. And it has maybe a couple teaspoons of this methyl cellulose mixture. And I'm going to spread that with my sponge, my clean sponge. And you can cut the sponges into whatever. So this has just those 2 folds before I put the color on. And I want you to see what that's going to look like. I'm going to use this sponge that already has red on it. And there you can see those lines are a little more dramatic right away. And the bigger the sponge, the less stroking you'll have. So if you want to use a sponge that's big with this nice soft corner, you'll have less texture on the sheet. But these sponges give you a very fine look. And this sponge, the cellulose sponge, gives you much more texture. So it's up to you what you're looking for in the surface of your sheet. I decided to use these finer sponges for the demo so that you could see for this part of it, so that you could see the marking a little bit better. So if I were doing something about geometry, I try to make each book with techniques that absolutely, and there you can really see that dramatic appearance of those lines. You can do all your painting in one go, or you can let things completely dry, even with the pastels, and end up going over and over them. So those pages in the 0 book for the letter point, I think we re-dampened them and painted them 4 times. Dawn and I went to the desert and ended up editioning that book there. Okay. So you could use very abstract and distorted words to say something that you didn't want people to know about, and just leave it like that. Or because I did it with an edge that has a bit of a point on it, it could make a very subtle set of marks. And, you know, obviously, as with other techniques, you could take just one technique for a book and just explore the possibilities of that one technique and do it over and over again. Okay. Sample 2. And I like to have a place on the sheet that I can make fingerprints, so that it's in an area that I'm going to cut off. My scrubby is going to really clean this up. You could certainly take advantage of all of this color and just lay down another sheet in it and have random effects on the back. That could be a pretty interesting way of working. I had a student once who decided that she was going to make a book and not leave any single piece of cut up pages left. Every single scrap of what she'd made in the workshop was going to be used. So, okay. My handy dandy 10-year-old cleaning cloth. Now I'm going to go to a bigger piece of paper. And we're going to do some things with new pastels. And I want to show you what my very lovingly used pastels look like. They, you know, they end up in a box looking like that. You can hardly tell what color they are. And like this, and they come nice and new and gorgeous like this. And make sure that if you're interested in this technique working wet, dry on wet, that you use new pastels. Prismacolor also makes this product that looks suspiciously similar. And it's made in the same way. It's a beautiful square stick, same shape and size. But see, they're art sticks and woodless colored pencils. And they have a grease base and they won't work in the wet surface. These will work on your paper dry, and then you can dampen it. So make sure that if you want to replicate this technique, you try out your own pastels or get a nice set, large or small, of the new pastels and work with them. And the reason I like them is because they're square and they make a nice broad line, if you like that, and you can break them into little pieces to make different widths of marks. And I've tried a lot of different things and they stand up to the moisture that you're introducing them to. You do want to make sure to have a sponge handy to wipe them off once you've coated them with a little bit of the polymer, because they'll dry. Okay, so the idea behind this, and the reason I chose it to show you, is because it's really hard to just put a pastel drawing into a book, because it's going to move around. The pastel is going to move around. But this technique makes it so that you can use pastels and you can use graphite. You can use charcoal and white chalks of different kinds. So you could do a piece on a colored piece of paper with just white chalk. Keep it really simple and elegant. And these are all different types of dry media. And there is a little bit of grease as a binder for the graphite. So it goes on in a much lighter shade than a black new pastel. So the idea is that you can make something that looks very much like a pastel drawing, or you can make a very colorful background that you're going to put other layers on, and it won't move around when you redampen it or from the abrasion of reading. So I'm going to dampen this sheet and just lay it in my damp pack for later, but I wanted you to see what it looks like finished with the first layer. And I'm getting it pretty wet, but again, I'm not really abrading it. And my faithful assistant will let it swell a little bit and put it in the damp pack for me in just a minute, while I'm showing you how to do this. Okay. Very damp surface. You can register pages, obviously, to do addition work, or if you want something to end up in a certain place in a series of pages, leaving a place for letterpress printing, writing, handwriting. And so make sure your surface is very, very wet. Smooth it down with a clean sponge by picking up whichever opposite side of the side you like to sponge with, And again, my tile grouting sponge is abrading this very little. And experimenting is wonderful, but I do like to have an idea for a work while I'm experimenting. So I'm working on a book about walls and doorways. Being invited in and being excluded. A vital topic right now. So this is the text wove that has been pre-dampened, and I'm going to make a series of doorways. When we were in Mexico a few years ago, I took a couple different trips. I took mountains of pictures of doorways and walls built out of every possible material. And I could certainly see how I'm wiping, very gently wiping off the edge of the new pastel. I want to make sure that I don't leave a coating of polymer, because then when I go to pick it up, it's going to be kind of varnished. So you don't want to wipe away too much. You just want to put it on a damp sponge. And there was an amazing doorway across from our house, our rental house, that had an opening that looked like this. So it had an opening that accommodated something too wide for the doorway. And what did we discover that was? Don, do you remember? So the opening actually had this kind of cross shape on it. And you could work absolutely intuitively, of course. What did you think it was?
I think it was a motorcycle with.
Yeah, it was some kind of a vehicle that had more width to it. And there's my arches watermark appearing because of the texture. Oops, that didn't come clean. So you're going to waste a tiny bit of the pastel, but it's much better than sealing it. So this is the coating is the methyl cellulose, which allows the paper and the pigment to stay nice and fluid as you're working. And the matte medium acts as a binder. So I could just leave this just the way it is, but I'm going to use my sponge to pull some color around. Okay, that's my sign. Okay, so this could be a finished sheet, and the first layer of something that has many layers over it, I can redampen it, and because I've done testing with this particular mixture, so I could tell you the mixture that you need to make. Remember, it's 3 parts methyl cellulose and 2 parts matte medium, and that gives you a surface that will accept and adhere the new pastel to the paper, to the text wove. My handy putty knife. Move that sheet there, huh? That purple sheet.
Hmm. 60 minutes are gone.
Okay,
For sure.
clean up. Just, you can hang it over the edge there. It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. If you saw beyond the edges of the table, you'd wonder. Okay. And so that is similar to this effect where you could use just the new pastels, or you can introduce graphite, which I'm going to do with the next one. And before we do that, I'm going to take the sheet that I dampened just a little bit before. You'll notice that it says layering MC/MM and pastel. So that tells me what's on the first layer. And then what I wanted to do is show you what you can do by taking a, really chaotic sheet that I did as a sample to test my mixture of methyl cellulose. And this time I'm going to dampen the surface. So I do that because you could certainly work on dry paper, but I like it not to move around when I'm doing these techniques. So I'm going to dampen the surface underneath the paper, dampen the surface above it. And so this is the kind of sheet that you just did, and you can see that the pastels do not move around very much. They moved around a little bit, so I changed my formula when I made up your PDF. And then we're going to take, so the Sumi ink going over this would give you a really, really subtle coloring. If you just wanted to push that back and tone it down, you could certainly do that. But I want to do something much more dramatic. And so this is black exterior latex house paint flat, which is very similar to black gesso. And you could roll this on to get a nice even coating. You'll find as you're working that you'll figure out exactly the amount of moisture that you want to add to your paper as you're working. This is a little bit moist, so I know that for pre-dampened paper in this climate, I could probably get away with using a little moisture. It'll take me a while to get used to it. And then my putty knife. You can open up windows on your sheet with a tool that really scrapes a lot away. You can use a sponge to take away a little or more. Black is obviously a really intense color. And then, because I have methyl cellulose and matte medium on here, there's enough that can adhere some of the white chalk. So I'm going to pull just a little bit more off. I don't have quite enough sponges. that don't have black on them. And of course, when these dry, they're going to change that much more. Sometimes they get more subtle, and sometimes they get more intense. So this is moving my color around because I probably didn't clean off this chalk as well as I should have. Bad dog, no biscuit. There, now it's transferring the white. And if I'm still not satisfied with how much of this is appearing, I would the next time do less black. And you can also use a little bit of the methyl cellulose and matte medium mixture as an eraser. So you can keep pulling it off. And where is my little piece of molding? I can't find it, so I'm going to use this. This is a little too dramatic now that I have that other area opened up. Oh, good. This is a great demonstration how you can wreck your piece. There. So that was a little too prominent when I put the right hand area in. So I'm going to sponge over it. And very gently open these windows up. And by using different pressure on the piece, on the tool, you can get different effects. And then if I want to put my unknown message in here, I can just do it and leave it. How are we doing for time, honey?
10:40. And then 20 minutes.
Okay.
And then
Are people asking questions, Linda?
10 minutes.
Actually, I have a lot of questions here for you, Suzanne.
Do you want to shoot some of them to me and maybe I can answer them by showing or doing something, Andrew? And we'll leave a little bit of question at the end if you wish also.
Okay. I guess there's a lot of questions about the methyl cellulose, if there's a particular brand or type that you use.
It's in the handout, and I checked with the vendors at the conference, and none of them handle them. I always like to support them. But Talus is where we get it from, and the recipe to make it for a nice consistency for this is in the handout. And it's a powder. And again, you need to kind of make it the day before, so you have to plan ahead. But the advantage to paste, which I always used to use, is that it does not go bad in a container as long as you make sure to pour out of it only, not pour anything back into it. And that means it's ready for you whenever you want to work. And It's clear, and you can mix it like paste to different consistencies depending on the effect and the amount of color you want on your surface. Yes.
We had a question about how you do additions and how similar or different they might be.
Yeah, so problem solving with additioning is makes a big stack of trials sometimes. Sometimes you get lucky and it's just a few, but quite often I experiment and figure something out and then just make sure to register the paper and stick to it. And the 0 edition was, we did 60 of everything to get 53 books. So that point piece that you saw had the 4 painting layers, and then and a silkscreen layer, and a tooling layer, 2 letterpress runs, sumi painting, gilding. I think that's it, and hand tooling. So you can layer these over and over and over again. And even in the edition, I ended up doing that. But it was a pretty amazing process to see that you really could make things that looked quite similar, and yet everyone was hand painted. And so every person gets a hand painted book, which I love. I love that part of it.
That's great. These papers are quite thick, but you've done a lot of work with the thinner Japanese tissues that Nancy mentioned. Were those very different, or did you just approach them?
I use them in a very different way. I quite often, in the picture for the conference, that is a piece done on the paintings are done on text wove and canson tint. The interleaving that carries the lettering is the Japanese paper. And I rarely do this technique on them, because although the fibers are extremely strong in the papers that I have bought from first Nancy and now Linda Marshall, I don't like the coating of the polymer on that tender organic paper so much. I size it with a very watered down UV LS varnish, and then and saturate it completely and let it dry. And then I can write and paint and do gilding on it, and it's nicely sized. So if you look at the Keynote again, that book called Every Breath that I showed you the whole book, that has the interleaved Japanese paper that have been sized but not paste papered. And when I want to tint the Japanese papers, I tend to put color in the sizing rather than introduce the methyl cellulose and the polymer. So we did a really dark piece, we did a colored piece, and you can see all my containers are recycled something. This is a milk jug that I really love, the way it feels in my hand. The seal's falling apart. And my straight methyl cellulose, which I'm going to mix on the surface with this. So instead of mixing it up like that, I'm going to just put a little bit of methyl cellulose on the surface. And this is a really nice tight sealing ketchup jar that's recycled and labeled with methyl cellulose. And my favorite one for black is from lime juice. So, and hear that click. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's a real click. So it's really sealing these up, which is the whole point. Okay. So I want to make this text wove just a little bit whiter. And if you are the kind of person that wants to really take great notes and make, records of formulas that you make, you're going to be able to reproduce your results much nicer than if you don't use that approach. So working with that doorways idea again. The Angelus Arian book about universal signs, I wrote to her at one point and asked her, because I've been on this threshold kick for a while and am about to do some things now. And I asked her about the doorway and the threshold or the gateway. And she said that if she were adding a universal symbol to her book, it would certainly be the doorway, because there are all kinds of connotations about, being on the threshold and stepping through the doorway. Being barred because you're on one side of a doorway and not allowed to go to the other. It's the through the looking glass idea from Alice in Wonderland, and the idea of the garden gate. Wiping off my chalk. And this time I'm going to use a little bit of, I didn't mention the latex or neutral gloves. Please, if you use gloves, choose a size that will allow you to take them off and reuse them, and choose a thickness that will allow you to reuse them a little bit. So here you can see that the black of the graphite, this is a little harder graphite, is very, very subtle, but it's really acting as a scraper and pushing away the paint. And so this is likely to be just one layer of a multi-layered piece. And you can plan and sketch it out very well, but I find that being in front of the materials and working on them. So I'm thinking this might suggest the horizon beyond the doorway, the possibilities of stepping through that doorway. I've got some little goober here, so I'm going to try to get rid of that. Okay, so whole cross-reference, a finished piece or one layer of a piece that maybe has a tiny little thing added to it or something more dramatic. Okay. Any more questions? I know we're out of time just about, so is there anything I can answer?
We are. There are a lot of specific questions. Suzanne, are you going to be available to maybe answer some questions on the conference website over the next couple of days, maybe?
Sure.
Okay, great. So anything that we haven't got to,
Yeah.
let me see if there's anything. I guess there were some questions about how to address the backside and how to keep that clean when you're working.
Yeah, and that's what really getting it down onto the sheet. See how clean that is? Can you see the top edge of that? And that it's just bleeding around the edges. And that's why getting it really smoothed down on a wet surface helps you keep it clean. And then if you've planned to do some trimming, that will make it so you can make the backs really clean. Sometimes the bleeding on the edges can be kind of interesting. So that's up to you.
Great, great. And do you ever have issues with sticking with the acrylics or anything? Do you do anything special for the papers to make sure they they lay flat in the end, or that they don't stick when the book's done?
Well, that's the advantage of using the methyl cellulose is that, and on the damp paper, because this is a way that the paint and the new pastel kind of settle and fuse into the surface a little bit. They're not really sitting on the surface in the same way that acrylic would sit on the surface, or certainly that pastel would. You know, they're in this thin layer that as the page dries, it really stays put, because you can, if your formula is right, of your relationship of methyl cellulose and acrylic is the right proportion, you will be able to just rub and rub and rub and rub on these pastel areas or on the strictly painted areas, and nothing moves. I joke with librarians and say, my books are almost washable. So please let people handle them.
That's great. I think that'll make Beth Shoemaker, our person last night, very happy to hear that.
Yeah, I try to really figure out techniques and physical, kind of the physics of what would it take to really make the image last a long time, have the color be permanent, and have it wear really, really well so that people can look at it, as many times as possible.
Great. Okay. Great. Well, maybe we'll continue the conversation back on the conference website.
Okay.
Suzanne, I think I'm going to hand it back to Linda.
Couldn't help it. Thank you all for coming. I think we're done.
All right. Thank you, Suzanne. That was a wonderful demo and presentation. Thanks for sharing your ideas and techniques with us. I'm sure we're all very inspired and anxious to try some of your techniques ourselves. Thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us. And once again, thank you to our sponsors. You'll be able to find the recording of this tomorrow on the webinars tab on the Rizuku Classroom portal, and continue the conversation in this area called Continued Conversations for the Presenters. If you have questions for Suzanne, we'll also pull out some of the questions that you guys have posted and let Suzanne know, and she may answer some of them in that portal area.
And then everybody is able to see the questions and the answers, Linda?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Great. Fantastic.
The next presentation will be Georgia Deal tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, and she'll be demonstrating gum transfer printing. At 1 o'clock, we'll have Joseph Lapie who will be demonstrating shaped type, creating imagery through printed letters. And at 7:30, our final presentation with Todd Pattison. That's probably good enough, 19th century bookbinding mistakes. So have a great evening, and thanks again for joining us.